Yo, what's good, everyone? Welcome in to the Fantasy Football Prodigy podcast. My name is Tyler Anderson. I am your host. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about week one of the 2024 fantasy football season. It is currently Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. I do not need this headset on. Sorry. But before we get into week one, make sure to drop a like if you are listening somewhere where you can like, and make sure to follow or sub wherever you are listening so that you can stay tuned for more episodes and become a fantasy football prodigy. So in this episode, like I said, we're talking about week one. My main message here is do not overreact. Week one is just a piece of the puzzle of the entire NFL season. But just because someone had a good or bad game in week one, that does not mean that that's how it's going to go for the rest of the year. There are 18 weeks in an NFL season, and there should be 17 weeks in your fantasy season if you're playing in a proper league. But after an entire offseason of waiting to see what happens, week one always seems to hold so much more weight than any other week in our minds, just because, like I said, you've been waiting all offseason, and you're finally getting football. You see it on the field for the first time, and you're like, all right, that's what it is. But you know, if someone has a big blow up game out of nowhere in week 5, you don't think much of it. But if someone blows up in week 1, or if someone disappears in week 1, panic or overexcitement sets in. So we just want to try to, adjust properly, look at the things that happened in week 1 and try to make educated guesses about what's going to happen moving forward. But just don't overreact. Okay. We're going to go through week 1 game by game. I haven't done a recap of an entire week before. In this episode, we're going to do every single game from week 1, starting from Thursday, the season opener, until the Monday night game. Moving forward, sorry, I do have a cough. Apologies. I'll try to cough away from the mic instead of right into it like I have been. Moving forward, it's possible that maybe I will do like more exclusive episodes for like those island games. I'm not really sure. We'll see what happens. But we're going to start with the first game of the NFL season, the season opener, where the Kansas City Chiefs hosted the Baltimore Ravens. The Chiefs ended up winning at home 27-20. The Ravens were an inch away from Isaiah Likely catching a touchdown to, I would say, send the game into overtime, but I believe the Ravens were going to go for 2. That's at least what Harbaugh was indicating when he thought they scored. He was throwing up the 2s. They were going to run a play, try to win it right there, walk-off win. But we were an inch away from greatness. That's what she said. Lamar Jackson, quarterback of the Ravens, we'll start with the Ravens side, finished with 273 passing yards, 1 touchdown on 26 of 41 passing. He also added 122 yards on the ground on 16 carries. That is why you draft Lamar Jackson. According to Fantasy Pros finishes, he was a quarterback 5 on the week, so really good game out of Lamar Jackson fantasy-wise. The O-line struggled a little bit in this one. I believe they lost a few pieces coming into the season, so I do think they will figure it out. They're a team that always seems to put it together, but yeah, definitely could have been better in that regard. Derrick Henry, the newly acquired running back in the offseason, how are things going to go? Well, it could have been better. 13 for 46 on the ground. He did get a touchdown on the ground. He did have a couple targets, no receptions. He had a long run of 9 yards, but look, this is kind of the thing with Derrick Henry, especially at this point in his career. Game script is very important for him. The Ravens are a good team. They're going to be winning a lot of games, but against the Chiefs, this was a game where they were trailing, and that game script fit very well with Justice Hill, fellow running back of the Ravens, who only finished 1 for 3 on the ground, but he had 6 for 52 through the air on 8 targets. So when they're trailing, Justice Hill is going to get in there and be a little PPR guy. But even in a down game, he got in the end zone, which that's one of the reasons Derrick Henry was, being drafted in the 2nd or 3rd round, was this offense is going to score a lot of touchdowns, and he should be the one to score a lot of those. Gus Edwards last year, he had like 13 touchdowns or something crazy like that. Yeah, he only played 46% of offensive snaps, Justice Hill 54, but in a game script like this, that's kind of to be expected. Even with the Titans last year, he had a ton of carries on the year, but I believe Tajay Spears actually outsnapped him technically. So that's just an important thing to note about him. But I think there will be brighter days ahead for Derrick Henry, who actually had an okay game. And then the big headline of this game, Isaiah Likely, 9 for 111 and 1. He had a big 49-yard touchdown. He almost had that second touchdown to set up the 2-point conversion. He was an inch away. And then the lead tight end, who was drafted really early, Mark Andrews, went 2 for 14 on 2 targets. If you kind of have been following along with kind of what happened in that game, the Chiefs really sold out to stop Mark Andrews, which definitely had a lot of opportunities for Isaiah Likely open up. Moving forward, I don't think you should be panicking. Mark Andrews is going to have his weeks. Pretty much every tight end has down weeks, and since it was week 1, people are going to overreact, especially because his teammate at the same position had a great game. But Isaiah Likely, obviously at this point, he's been picked up in your league if he wasn't already drafted, but I don't think this will be the norm. I think Andrews will be the number 1 tight end usually, as long as, a lot of defenses aren't going to be able to just take away Mark Andrews. The Chiefs have a really good defense, but Likely is worth a pickup just because of the tight end landscape. A guy like that who's even physically capable of having this game needs to be picked up. And, I don't think this will be the norm, but I think he'll be a start-worthy option, especially with guys like David Njoku, going to miss a few games here. Jake Ferguson had that injury. We don't know if he's going to play week 2, but even if he's like limited or whatever, you might want another option. So definitely a name to monitor. But receiving-wise, there was not a lot in the wide receiver game. Rashad Bateman was 2 for 53 on 5 targets. Zay Flowers had 6 catches, 10 targets. You love that, but only turned into 37 yards. And the only other receiver to catch a pass was Aguilar, 1 for 6. So better days ahead for Flowers. I mean, he's a shifty guy, but we need the wide receiver game in Baltimore is always, it seems like it's hard to really find like a solidified every week guy, but I think Flowers will have better weeks moving forward, obviously. And then for the Chiefs, Mahomes was 20 for 28, 291 and 1 with 1 interception. What's there to say about Mahomes? Like he's a good, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Not great for fantasy in week 1. According to Fantasy Pros, he was a quarterback 14. Not great, but you're going to start him every week. Hopefully it's not a repeat of last year where they just ran the ball and played good defense. But I mean, the Chiefs did have 2 rushing touchdowns. If Mahomes throws both of those in or even 1, it's a whole different narrative. Pacheco had 1 of those along with 45 yards on 15 carries. Newly signed Samaje Perine was not super involved. That might change moving forward as he gets acclimated. Xavier Worthy, the rookie, had a big game, 1 for 21 on the ground. That was one of those rushing touchdowns that I mentioned. He took it to the house. And then he had 2 for 47 and a touchdown through the air. 35-yard was his longest. Like, limited touches, but shows that he's explosive. No Hollywood Brown there. Once he comes back, I don't think he's taking Rashee Rice off the field, and I think the team likes Hollywood, so we'll see how it gets divided. But that's kind of been the story with the Chiefs, is like they'll sometimes have weapons, or but you never really know who to start outside of Kelsey, who did not have himself a very good game. 3 for 34 on 4 targets. Obviously, if you drafted him, you're staying with him, but I think the days of prime number 1 overall every week Travis Kelsey are gone, but I do think he'll have better weeks moving forward. And Rashee Rice, one of the steals of the draft, in my opinion, 7 for 103 through the air on 9 targets. Just, he's good. He's a good player, and I don't think this suspension is going to come this year. And even if it does later in the year, where you drafted him, he's going to be great for the duration of however long he plays. Noah Gray, backup tight end, 3 for 37. 4 yards, and Travis Kelsey. Gray signed an extension, so a dynasty guy to monitor as Kelsey gets older. Pacheco had 2 for 33 through the air as well. And Juju. Man, Juju was once the dynasty 101. 0 catches. He had 1 target. It's kind of crazy how the turntables. We're going to move on to the Friday night game in Brazil. And that's right. You heard correct. There was a Friday night game between the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles did win that game 34-29 over the Packers. We'll start with the winning team here. Jalen Hurts had himself, I don't know, man. Like, I traded for him in Dynasty this offseason, and he finished all right. He was a quarterback 10, 18.4 points, according to Fantasy Pros. Not an electric game, but Saquon Barkley did put 2 in the end zone on the ground. We'll talk about that later. So, obviously, if this is a bad game for Jalen Hurts, you know, like, he's so consistent with his rushing ability and the weapons around him, but not a huge blow-up game in a spot where they had 34, but you'll definitely take what he did. 278 and 2 through the air. He also had 2 picks. Those interceptions were not great looking. Like, no interceptions are good, but I was watching the game and I was like, oh, that didn't look right. But newly acquired Saquon Barkley, we're all worried about the tush push. Is Saquon going to get touchdowns? Well, he had 3. He had 24 for 109 on the ground to go along with 2 rushing touchdowns. And then in the air, he had 2 for 23 and 1 touchdown on 2 targets. You know, obviously, Hurts will run some in at some points too, but Saquon Barkley is looking like he was a good draft value. I have him in one of my 5 leagues. We went 5-0 this week, by the way. Turn me up, chat. But yeah, Saquon is the lead back there, and he's on a good offense. I mean, that O-line is great. They made DeAndre Swift look great last year, so I love his situation. Jalen Hurts also had a 13 for 33 on the ground for what it's worth, and Kenneth Gainwell was the only running back to log a carry, and he was 1 for 2. In the receiving game, A.J. Brown, 5 for 119 and a touchdown, had a 67-yard catch, 10 targets. You love that. He's a stud. Devontae Smith had a solid game, 7 for 84 through the air, 8 targets. You absolutely love that. Dallas Goedert, 4 for 31. I mean, that's just a typical, you know, Dallas Goedert game. A.J. Brown was the wide receiver 7 on the week in half PPR. Devontae Smith was the wide receiver 21, so 2 top 24 plays there. And then a whole lot of nothing after that. I mean, you know, Dotson had 1 target. So obviously I didn't expect him to do much in his first game with the team, but yeah, his career is not going the way we all thought. On the other side, Jordan Love, quarterback for the Packers, 17 to 34, 260 and 2 through the air to go along with 1 interception. He had an all right game. He did leave on like the second to last play with an injury. They did not put him on injured reserve. It looked like it was some sort of knee injury, but last I heard, at least on my fantasy platforms and everything, he was listed as doubtful, so he's probably going to miss, you know, some games. But it's notable that they did not put him on IR, which would require him to miss at least 4 games. What is also notable is the backup, Malik Willis, has looked to be really bad in his career to this point. So we'll see how that plays out. But a lot of these Packers weapons moving forward, I'm a little bit concerned, even though a lot of them looked really, really good in week 1. Josh Jacobs, 16 for 84 on the ground. It was definitely a slow start for Jacobs, but he ripped off a few chunk runs later in the game. Emmanuel Wilson was serving as the backup with the Dylan and Lloyd injuries. Lloyd should be coming back in the somewhat near future. Jaden Reed had 1 carry for 33 on the ground, went for a touchdown. He also only had 4 catches on 6 targets, but went for 138 and 1 touchdown, a 70-yarder. He also had another touchdown called back when both teams had 12 men on the field. This is a guy that I had on 2 benches in my leagues, and now we all face, and I'm sure a lot of you did out there too, and now we face the conundrum. Do we throw him into the lineup now that he had that great week 1? He was the number 1 wide receiver overall on the week. Or what about the quarterback situation? Or do we keep him on the bench because Malik Willis is going to not be able to complete a forward pass? I will say, out of all the Green Bay receivers, Jaden Reed, in addition to just being the best receiver in week 1 and looking electric and having a great finish to the season last year, in addition to those reasons being why I would choose him over the other receivers in Green Bay, he's a player that can get a lot of like manufactured targets close to the line of scrimmage. He had 1 carry in this game. He's kind of like a mini Deebo Samuel in a way. So he would be the player I'm most confident in that receiving core moving forward with this injury and most likely beyond. But obviously the ceiling is a little bit limited when you go from Jordan Love to Malik Willis. Other receiving options there, Romeo Doubs, 4 for 50 through the air on 7 targets. Looks like he played 87% of snaps. Jaden Reed only played 72, but and then Christian Watson played 63. Dontavian Wicks played 46. So this was a crowded receiver room going into the year, but you know, they all were involved to some degree. I think it's kind of like the Houston Texans, where some weeks will be one player, some weeks will be another player, but they all actually had pretty okay games, like where you were drafting them. Christian Watson had 5 targets, turned into 3 for 13, but he got in the end zone, luckily. So, you know, luckily he had that touchdown, but the distribution might be hard to know moving forward. But, you know, hopefully Christian Watson can stay healthy, but if he, you know, has a hamstring issue at some point, which has plagued his whole career, you know, that will definitely kind of narrow down the options there. But yeah, we're going to move on to the next game. We're going to go to the Sunday games here. So we're going to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers traveling to Atlanta, taking them down 18-10. It was an ugly game. The Steelers had 6 field goals, I believe, right? That's crazy. Chris Boswell, 6 for 6, had a 57-yarder. If you're in a kicker league, I hope you started him. I believe he was the number 1 kicker on the week. There were a lot of big kicker weeks, but he had the biggest of them all. Pause. But in terms of positions that actually matter, Justin Fields got the start with Russell Wilson dealing with that injury. Definitely not the game we were hoping out of him. 17 for 23 and 156. No touchdowns, no interceptions, but he did add 57 yards on the ground on 14 carries, so that is always a big part of his game. And in week 2, Russell Wilson is probably not going to play again. So whenever Justin Fields is active, he's always someone you can throw in there. I had Trevor Lawrence as my week 1 starter, and I started Lawrence over Fields. None of them finished that great. Fields gets Cleveland in week 2. I'm not a big fan of that matchup. I was hoping against Miami he would do better, but Justin Fields gets the Denver Broncos. So I might actually play Fields over Trevor Lawrence this week if he gets to start in that league. Definitely someone worth playing, and it wasn't great in week 1, but he's had big games in the past. At the running back position, Najee Harris, a classic Najee game, guys. 20 for 70, averaging 3.5 per carry. He actually had a long of 20 yards, but that's just such a Najee Harris stat line. 2 targets, 1 for 9 through the air. And then, of course, Arthur Smith and Cordero Patterson, they're bros. Patterson had 4 for 13 on the ground. That's just, you just love it. It's just like Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson in Atlanta. Let's throw Cordero Patterson in the mix. Why not? I just want the record to show that when he was on the Vikings and his career didn't really pan out the way we thought, I was telling everyone, like, play him at running back, dude. And what eventually happened? Played running back, and he's pretty good at it. But anyways, I digress. Jaylen Warren, the more true backup, I would say, had 2 for 7 on the ground, 2 for 13 on the air, through the air on 2 targets. He was dealing with a hamstring injury. I think his involvement will be greater later in the year, but I don't think this offense is going to be good. A lot of ugly games, and it's a committee with not only Najee, but apparently Cordero Patterson will be involved to some degree. I'm sure he'll have his goal line touchdowns as well. So ugly situation there. George Pickens, 6 for 85 through the air on 7 targets. He did have negative 10 rushing yards on 1 carry, but he's just really good. I mean, if he ever gets a decent quarterback, I mean, I'm scared to see what he could do because he's a good player. Pat Freiermuth, one of those late streaming options at tight end that you probably got in drafts. 4 targets, 27 yards on 4 catches. Not exciting. He's going to probably need a touchdown to be relevant. Like I said, Warren was 2 for 13, and after that, a bunch of people with 1 catch. Calvin Austin had 1 for 7. Van Jefferson, 1 for 1. So no more need to talk about that team. It's going to be a gross offense, but 20 carries for Najee is encouraging for his fantasy sake, and he'll probably get better as the season goes along, just like he has throughout his career. Kirk Cousins for the Falcons, it was not a good game. 16 of 26, 155, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Did not look very mobile, which he never has been, but you know, if you've been on NFL Twitter, he's just been getting kind of roasted. People are definitely scared. There was a video of a throw where he didn't even push off of his plant foot, or off of his back foot to kind of drive into the throw. So we'll see. But it was not a good week one start for an old quarterback coming off of an Achilles. Bijan Robinson had 18 carries, 68 yards. He was the lead guy. He was the main guy. There was really no contest there. So you absolutely love that. Just because last year with Arthur Smith, the utilization of some of these guys was just questionable. But he was clearly the guy there. Bijan Robinson was on the field for 89% of snaps. So that's amazing. 18 for 68 on the ground. 5 for 43 through the air. Love those 5 targets. Tyler Algier only had 3 carries, turned it into 21 yards. Seems like he's more of just a true handcuff at this point. Kyle Pitts, he got in the end zone. The Pitts believers, we're back. I once traded George Kittle and a first-round pick for him. Hasn't worked out to this point, but he got in the end zone, but only 3 for 26 through the air. Luckily, one was a touchdown, and another big disappointment, 2 for 15 through the air on 3 targets for Drake London. He was on the field for 100% of the snaps, but it just didn't work out. And Darnell Mooney was kind of a guy who was sort of like a deep wide receiver sleeper. He only had 15. So 15 yards on 1 catch. So definitely not what we were hoping for out of that situation. It was just an ugly game overall, but honestly, that's not surprising going into that game. Here's a little bit more of an exciting game. The Arizona Cardinals took on the Buffalo Bills. High scoring game. It had a high over under. The Bills ended up winning 34-28, but the Cardinals were winning this game. They were definitely an offense that I was looking forward to seeing, and I thought they had a good chance of winning that game, but they did not. We'll start with the Bills since they won. Josh Allen is just a stud. He had 18 of 23 in the air to go along 232 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also added 39 yards on the ground to go along with 2 rushing touchdowns. So 4 total touchdowns, no interceptions. He was the quarterback 1 on the week with over 30 points. He's a stud. Not much more to say about him. You're going to play him every week. James Cook, he had a pretty solid game. 19 for 71 on the ground. He had, where's his receiving? So 19 for 71 on the ground, 3 for 32 through the air. You love that. Didn't get in the end zone. That's kind of been the thing with him, but you know what? He had solid yardage, and that's kind of, I think there'll be opportunities for him to catch more passes. He was on the field for 61% of snaps. I wonder how much was Ray Davis on? 10%. Okay. Interesting. The rookie running back was not very involved. He had 3 for 13 for what it's worth. But in the wide receiver game, rookie Keon Coleman, someone who I wasn't really high on, didn't have the greatest camp reports, but he actually looked pretty good. He had a solid game, 4 for 51 on 5 targets. They were moving him around the field a little bit. A lot of reports were saying he was going to kind of be in one spot on the field where he wasn't necessarily projected to succeed. But I think moving forward, he's a guy that will make some noise. And other than that, it was pretty ugly. Khalil Shakir, 3 for 42, got in the end zone on 3 targets. Matt Collins, 2 for 25 and a touchdown. So, hey, man, the 2 auxiliary receivers got their touchdowns, but MVS 1 for 19, Dawson Knox 1 for 23. Curtis Samuel, worth bringing up, only 2 for 15. That was, and only had 2 targets. And then kind of the headline in terms of busts in this game was Dalton Kincaid. I expect him to be great this year. I thought he was going to be hyper targeted every week and need to be relied on. And in a game where they scored 34 points as a team, that guy had 1 catch for 11 yards on 2 targets. There's something to be said about, the defense was kind of selling out to stop him, but still, like, that is a scary floor for a guy that went pretty early in drafts. He was usually the 5th tight end off the board. I think better days are ahead, and I think he's honestly a buy low. If someone is panicking in your league and you can get him on the cheap, I would definitely do that. For the Cardinals, Kyler Murray, 21 of 31 through the air, 162 and 1. Had 5 for 57 on the ground. You love that, but I have NFL Red Zone, so I was kind of jumping around from game to game, but the the vibe I got was that they just weren't really pushing the ball down the field to their receivers. I mean, we'll get into them later, but not a lot of catches to outside receivers. Kyler Murray was the quarterback 15 on the week in a game like this. That is very disappointing. He was one of my guys at quarterback. James Conner, 16 for 50 on the ground with a touchdown. He also had a 3 for 33 through the air on 4 targets. Trey Benson, 3 for 13. This is clearly the James Conner show. And he's the lead back until he probably gets hurt. Hopefully he only misses like a game or two, but he usually, I don't think he's ever played a full season. So when that happens, Trey Benson will be more valuable, but yeah, it's James Conner's backfield for now. In the receiving game, Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 for 4 on 3 targets. He had a drop, and his only catch went for 4 yards. Just not involved, and they just were not targeting outside receivers. Michael Wilson on the outside, 1 for 5 on 2 targets. Greg Dortch was the guy that was getting all the targets, 6 for 47 through the air on 8 targets. Trey McBride, highly drafted tight end, broke out last year, had 9 targets, only turned into 5 for 30, but I think that's another buy low opportunity at tight end. Just like Dalton Kincaid. I think Kincaid's target numbers were concerning, but I do think that will not be the norm. McBride saw 9 targets at the tight end position. That's really good. It just did not amount to much for fantasy in this game. But again, we're not going to overreact to a bad game from a tight end, because pretty much every tight end has a bad game from time to time, especially now that Kelsey is not the player that he once was, and he's not being relied on as heavily, because they're trying to kind of save him up to make a Super Bowl run each and every year, it seems like. Moving on to the Titans versus Bears. This game was insane. The Bears did end up winning at home 24-17, but the Titans completely blew this. Caleb Williams did not look good in his first start. He had 14 of 29, 93 yards, 5 for 15 on the ground. I mean, 93. He threw the ball 29 times and had less than 100 yards. Wow. I mean, that is hard to do. That is honestly not an easy feat to accomplish, but somehow they were able to do that. What is that on? It says he averages 3.2 yards an attempt. Wow. Just a terrible outing for a guy who has weapons. I mean, we'll talk about them in a sec, but in the running game, DeAndre Swift, 10 for 30 on the ground. 1 target, no catches. Caleb Williams added 15 yards on the ground. DJ Moore had a carry for 14. Bayless Jones, Travis Homer, and Khalil Herbert each had a couple carries. And in the receiving game, I mean, DJ Moore had 8 targets, turned into 5 for 36. Keenan Allen had 11 targets, turned into 4 for 29. They missed on a couple plays when I was watching that game that, I think Keenan Allen should have had at least 1 touchdown from when I was watching. So I think better days are ahead for him, and you love the 11 targets, but Caleb has to, get it clicking a little bit. Adunze, not surprisingly to me, wasn't super involved. Only 4 targets, 1 for 11 in the air. I just wasn't ever really on board with drafting a guy that is the clear 3rd stringer and needs an injury to be relevant. You know what I mean? A lot of people drafted him pretty in the mid rounds, and I was not about that. And in the tight end game, notable to add here, Cole Kmet, the traditional starting tight end, played 27 snaps. Gerald Everett played 34. It's come out that he's kind of like their lead tight end, and if anything, it's going to be a committee, it looks like. So Cole Kmet already was going against it with them bringing in Keenan Allen and signing Rome Odunze, but if he's truly getting passed by Gerald Everett on the depth chart, that is actually very surprising to me, because I kind of view Cole Kmet as a quality player, and it seems like he's pretty solid in the receiving game, but definitely, if that trend continues, I mean, he's completely irrelevant for fantasy. You would hope that maybe he could have become a streamer with touchdown upside if Caleb Williams really clicked as a rookie, and if you were desperate at tight end, even with those other receivers there, you would hope he would be viable, but definitely not at this point. And then another ugly game on the other side. Will Levis, 19 for 32, 127 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, added 4 for 36 on the ground. And then in the running back room, we were told this was going to be a split, but Tony Pollard was the guy, 16 for 82 and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 3 for 12 on 4 targets. Meanwhile, fellow split committee mate, if you want to call it that, Tajay Spears had 4 for 21. He also had 4 for 11 in the air. But he was clearly second fiddle to Pollard. And then in the receiving game here, well, actually, let me pull up the snap percentage here. So Pollard played 61% of snaps with 39. And then where is Spears? He played 45% of snaps, 29. Okay, so 10 fewer snaps, way less opportunities too. That's what we really care about for running backs, is opportunities. And it's pretty ugly in the passing game. Calvin Ridley, 7 targets, only turned into 3 for 50. I think he'll have better games, but definitely not what we were hoping for. The Bears defense is good, so give them time to, we'll see how things pan out. Tyler Boyd, another free agent acquisition, 3 for 18. Chikakonkwo, 2 for 15 and a touchdown. And then Hopkins, 1 for 8. I'm actually interested to see his. So Hopkins only played 17 snaps. 27% of snaps. He was coming back from an injury, though, so that does make sense. I think as the season goes along, he'll get more involved, but with the crowded receiving room, we need Will Levis to play better. He is a gunslinger. I think better days will be ahead for that offense, and I kind of liked Will Levis as sort of a late-round upside pick in like a 2-quarterback league or whatever, or a really deep league, but week 1, it did not work out, but I think he will have his fair share of fantasy games that are, worthwhile or at least streamable. A surprising game here, a survivor pool buster. The Patriots at home took on the Cincinnati Bengals and defeated them 16-10. What's with the Bengals and starting slow? I'm doing the little ESPN survivor thing, and I did not pick this game because I was actually worried. I played the Patriots defense in some DFS stuff. I went with Seattle, which we'll get into later, but spoiler, that was a good pick over Denver. But Jacoby Brissett, 15 for 24, 121 through the air, no touchdowns, no interceptions, 7 for 32 on the ground. Game manager, okay? But Ramondre Stevenson, great value, it looks like, in the draft, 25 for 120 and 1 touchdown on the ground. He also had 3 targets, caught all of them for only 6 yards. But yeah, he's in the right game script. He's probably going to be good. But it's the Patriots. I don't think they're gonna typically be in games. You know what I mean? But he will be their lead back. Gibson, for what it's worth, Antonio Gibson, who they brought in free agency, also had 7 for 18 on the ground. No catches, so interesting. And then, in the passing game, Austin Hooper was their leading receiver. 2 for 31. Tyquan Thornton, 2 for 27. KJ Osborne had 6 targets, turned into 3 for 21. Hunter Henry, 2 for 18. Mario Douglas, 2 for 12. Jalen Polk, 1 for 6. Kind of like what we were worried about. It's a mishmash. And then I do have the numbers here to go back to that running back room. Ramondre Stevenson had 51 snaps on the field for 78% of the snaps, whereas Gibson only had 14 on the field for 22. I believe he was dealing with an injury, if I'm not mistaken. So that could, even out a little bit more as the season goes along. But I thought I remember he was dealing with some sort of injury. But Joe Burrow, another year, another slow start, 21 for 29, 164 yards, no touchdowns, 4 for 15 on the ground. Zach Moss looked pretty good, and he looked like the clear lead back, which is important to note. I highlighted that backfield in the offseason. I just wasn't sure who it was going to be. I preferred Zach Moss, but Chase Brown also had upside. Zach Moss, at least so far, looks to be the guy. Only had 9 carries because they kind of abandoned the run, but 9 for 44 and a touchdown. You love that. And then Chase Brown. Well, Zach Moss also had 2 for 17 through the air on 4 targets. Chase Brown, 3 for 11 on the ground, 3 for 12 through the air on 3 targets. No Higgins in this game, which just Higgins being out and then Jamar Chase dealing with that contract situation through camp. I was just a little sketched out, especially after seeing how bad they started last year. And Chase did suit up for this one. Had 6 targets, caught all 6 for 62. So he didn't completely ruin your lineup. Wasn't a great game, but you can survive that. And I wouldn't be too worried about Chase, but this offense has to, get out of the funk. Hopefully it's not another early season funk. Oshivas had 6 targets with the absence of Higgins. He had 6 targets, turned into 3 for 26. T. Higgins, when he comes back, Oshivas is not going to be as relevant, but he stepped up and had a few catches, but kind of like a DFS play that a lot of people had, but didn't really turn into anything that great. At tight end, Hudson and Gesicki had 18 yards. Yeah, really not much to add outside of that. Let's get out of this game. I think we talked about all we really need to talk about there. Let's go to a more exciting game. The Houston Texans taking on the Colts. This was a really, really fun game. The Colts hosted the Texans at home, and Texans won 29-27. Very exciting game. CJ Stroud came out, had himself a little bit of a game, finishing as a quarterback 8 on the week, 24 of 32 for 234 and 2 through the air. Added 4 for 13 on the ground. In the running game, Joe Mixon was a beast, tied his career high in carries with 30. He was the running back 2 in standard leagues and half PPR leagues. I'll give you full PPR while we're at it. Also the running back 2. 30 carries is insane. You love that usage. Hopefully he can hold up if he gets that kind of usage, but also had 3 targets, turned into 19 yards through the air. Got in the end zone. I mean, you love that. That was a great game for Mixon. I wasn't really super in on him, but I should have known. I traded him away a couple seasons ago when everyone was saying his career is about to be over. Sort of like I did with James Conner probably like 3 years ago now. I traded Conner away for like James Robinson. That worked out great. And then I traded Mixon away for a 2nd round pick, and they threw in Jamal Williams after his touchdown year. And of course, Mixon has just been amazing. I think he was a top 5 running back last year, I believe. And then this year, he might do it again. So anytime I get rid of someone, I also cut Jordan Mason in the offseason as the CMC owner because I was targeting Elijah Mitchell. I drafted Garendo. I'm like, okay. And it's just one more throwback, too. Cut Raheem Mostert when he was the 3rd or 4th string running back on the 49ers as well. So no matter who I cut, they're going to be great. Anyways, just had to vent there. Dameon Pierce, only 3 for 16. Obviously, just had to spell Mixon a little bit. But in the passing game, the big 3 receivers, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs. Nico Collins was the main, he was the most impressive. 6 for 117 through the air on 8 targets. He looked great. Tank Dell, 3 for 40, had 7 targets. Stephon Diggs, only 6 for 33, but he had 2 touchdowns. Stephon Diggs was the wide receiver 10 on the week with 33 yards. I don't expect that to be the norm. Nico Collins was the wide receiver 14. So 2 great games out of the 3 receivers there. It's going to be a revolving door of who's going to have a good week when. But if I had Stephon Diggs in a league, which I don't in any of my 5 leagues, but if I did, I would be trying to sell high on him. Also, 6 leagues. Sorry, I'm also in a guillotine league. We went 6-0 this week, baby. Come on. But the air yardage wise, Stephon Diggs the metrics are not great. I wouldn't trade him away for free, but if there's someone who believes he's a bona fide wide receiver 1, sell high. Nico Collins, I think, is the true alpha here, and Tank Dell will have his weeks. These guys are actually getting downfield targets, whereas Stephon Diggs, we were concerned about his fall off in Buffalo, and even though he had 2 touchdowns, this does not prove to me that he still, quote, has it, just because he happened to get in the end zone twice. But he's going to have his weeks where he's good just because it's a good offense, but if you can capitalize on a 2-touchdown week, this could be the best game of the year for him. Dalton Schultz at tight end definitely is appearing to suffer with the addition of these new receivers in the offseason, or Stephon Diggs at least. Tank Dell coming back healthy. Nico Collins still being the guy. 3 targets, caught 3 of them for 16. And that's all of note there. Anthony Richardson had a very interesting game. 9 of 19 through the air. That's not good. Turned into 212 yards on 9 completions. Caleb Williams threw the ball 20 more times than Anthony Richardson completed the ball, and he had over 100 more yards than Caleb Williams. Insane. 2 touchdowns through the air to go along with 1 interception. Also added 6 for 56 on the ground and 1 rushing touchdown. He's a cheat code in fantasy. If you got him at a good value, at a good ADP, he's going to be a steal. He was going pretty high at some point, but his ADP was kind of all over the place depending on your draft. So hopefully if you got him at a good ADP. But even if not, he's going to be good as long as he stays healthy. Looks like he was a quarterback 4 on the week. And then Jonathan Taylor, 16 for 48 on the ground, got in the end zone. No receptions. That's kind of going to be the problem with this mobile quarterback. I think he'll have better weeks, but I think his upside is a little bit limited just because, Richardson is going to probably run some in. He's not going to throw to the running back position because, usually running backs with mobile quarterbacks just don't get a lot of catches because their quarterback just takes off and runs instead of dumping it off. Receiving game, Alec Pierce had a big game, 3 for 125 and 1 with Josh Downs not playing. He stepped up. He's always a big play guy. He had a 60-yard catch, an average of 41.7 yards. Ashton Doolin had 1 for 54 and 1 on 1 target. Pittman had 8 targets. Hey, 8 targets on 19 attempts. That's pretty good. Turned into 4 for 31. Adonai Mitchell had 5 targets, only finished with 1 for 2, but he missed on, I think it was 2 touchdown opportunities. It was at least 1, but I think there were 2 shots that they took where they just did not connect. Obviously, these guys got a little bit lucky. I would not chase this. A quarterback who can complete under 10 passes a game, that is a risk, and you don't want to rely on that too heavily unless you're in like a deep league. But they just so happen to hit on some big plays, but the passing totals do not give me confidence there. We're going to move on to Jacksonville and Miami. Supposed to be a high-scoring game. Kind of disappointed. Dolphins end up winning at home 20-17. Tua was a bit of a disappointment. He was one of my starts of the week. He had 338 yards, but only 1 touchdown. In the rushing game, Devon Achane led the way with 10 carries, 24 yards only, and a touchdown, but he had 7 for 76 through the air. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be great. He is dealing with an injury, but it's looking like there's a good chance of him playing on Thursday night against the Bills. But Raheem Mostert already ruled out for that game. Huge disappointment. I started him over Jaden Reed. I still won, but I mean, that cost me over 30 points. Raheem Mostert, 6 carries, 9 yards, hit 3 targets, turned into 2 for 10. He was one of my favorite values in all of drafts. He was a start of the week, and he just did not pan out. I believe he suffered that injury that he's out with during the game. And when I was kind of watching that game, it seemed like he just was not really in there. I don't know if it has to do with the injury. Honestly, I hope it does, because if not, Raheem Mostert is going to be a bust. If he gets healthy and more involved, that would be great. I didn't expect him to be the running back 2 again this year, but I expected him to be one of the steals of the draft, and he's going to need more involvement here. But with Raheem Mostert out, that opens up opportunities in this backfield for other players. If Achane plays, the question is who's going to take over the Mostert role, Jeff Wilson or Jalen Wright. Jalen Wright was inactive, the rookie, for this game. I wouldn't read too much into that because I believe Achane was also inactive and not used a bunch early in the year last year, and we all know what happened with that. Turned into a stud. But even in this game, Jeff Wilson, 5 for 26. He's had big games with the Dolphins and the 49ers in that offense in the past. So one of those guys is going to be relevant. I couldn't tell you who. I'm recording this September 11th. Make sure to monitor the reports as we get closer to the Thursday game time to see what the word is. But yeah, definitely not ideal. I mean, the knock on those 2 guys was injuries, and Mostert's already missing a game, hopefully just 1 game, and then Achane is questionable. Speaking of injuries, Jalen Waddle left with an injury. He was actually ruled out, and then he came back in. So he had 1 for 3 on the ground, 5 for 109 through the air on 5 targets. Tyreek Hill, stud, 7 for 130 and 1 in the air. Auto start every week, both of those guys. Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 4, 22.5 points in half PPR. Waddle, Wide receiver 17 with 13.7. I mean, maybe in a tough matchup you sit him if you're in a 10-team league or something and you're stacked, but I would be starting him pretty much every week. And outside of that, nothing really relevant in the receiving game. For Jacksonville, they were dominating this game. And then Travis Etienne had that fumble when he was rushing towards the goal line, and that really cost them the game ultimately. I mean, that was what kind of started their downfall. Lawrence definitely disappointed. Another one of my starts of the week, 12 for 21 through the air for 162 and 1. Not good. Only 1 for 8 on the ground. In the rushing game, Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. Hello there, Tank Bigsby. Both had 12 carries. Tank Bigsby, 12 for 73 on the ground. Travis Etienne, 12 for 44 on the ground with 1 touchdown. Had that brutal fumble because they fumbled it, didn't score as a result. And then the Dolphins had that big, 80-yard touchdown to Tyreek Hill after that. I mean, that was just a huge, huge swing. Tank Bigsby he played 17 snaps, only 32%, but had 12 carries on those snaps. And then ETN played 37 snaps, 70% of them, but they equaled each other in carries. ETN did have 3 targets, 2 for 15 through the air, whereas ETN did not have a catch. And the receivers were not great in this one. I mean, Gabe Davis had 3 for 62, which I guess is good for Gabe Davis. Probably weren't starting him. But Brian Thomas looked good in his first ever game. He's a guy to pick up and monitor. And you could probably, honestly, I don't know if I'd start him against Cleveland, but I think as the season progresses, I love his upside, and he might be a guy that becomes a steal. I have him in like 1 of my 6 leagues, and I wish I had him in more. But 4 for 47 and a touchdown, and you know, he looked good. He just looked good on the field. Christian Kirk, big disappointment. 4 targets, only 1 catch for 30 yards. Luckily, it was a big catch. That's not really his game, but played 72% of snaps. Brian Thomas played 77. Gabe Davis actually played 94%. And then Evan Ingram only had 1 catch for 5 yards on 4 targets. So overall, just a disappointing game. I wouldn't overreact, but we definitely were not. We were expecting a shootout, and we did not get it. The Saints hosted the Carolina Panthers. And I thought this game might be competitive. Also, if you're watching the video and I open my mouth really wide, it's because my ears have been like popping for like 3 days. So like I'm trying to like get them to pop. You know what I mean? But my audio only listeners, if you want to check that out, head over to the YouTube Fantasy Football Prodigy. Saints slaughtered the Panthers 47-10 at home. Wasn't even close. Derek Carr, 19 of 23, 200 yards, 3 touchdowns. Had a great game. Alvin Kamara, 15 of 83 on the ground and a touchdown. He was my guy, and he was great. 5 for 27 through the air on 5 targets. And this game got ugly early. So if it was competitive, I mean, I think Kamara would have saw 10 targets, but cold, sorry. Jamal Williams sighting. Hello. I mentioned him earlier. 11 for 38 and a touchdown. This game got away early, and he got some garbage time work, but Taysom Hill was involved early in this game in the rushing game. It's been said that he's going to be involved in the running game. He had 5 for 35 on the ground. You know, I lost Njoku in like 3 leagues. If you aren't able to pick up Isaiah Likely, Taysom Hill, if he's out there, I think he's worth playing just because he's going to see rushing involvement, which is crazy at the tight end position. And he's a guy who he has blow up games every year. So, you know, you could play some guy who you pray has a touchdown and finishes with 6.1 points, but Taysom Hill has actual upside. Rashid Shaheed had a big 59-yard touchdown, 3 for 73 and 1. Foster Moreau, Jawan Johnson, and Taysom Hill, all the tight ends had some notable moments. Taysom Hill had 1 catch for 1 yard on 2 targets. Foster Moreau, 4 targets, turned into 4 for 43 and a touchdown. And then Jawan Johnson, 3 targets, 2 for 26 and a touchdown. I think Jawan Johnson is their true actual tight end. Foster Moreau is kind of the backup tight end. And then Taysom Hill is sort of the gadget guy. But this game got away early from the Panthers, so it's kind of hard to know what to make of the snap shares and everything. So we'll just kind of monitor that moving forward. Pardon me, having a cough attack. Bad game for Chris Olave, 2 for 11. Just didn't really need him. And Derek Carr just loves, he loves Rashid Shaheed, so they just have a connection. Bryce Young, terrible game. We thought maybe second year things would look better. They did not. 13 of 30 through the air, 161 yards, 2 interceptions. It's not looking good for the Panthers and their quarterback. It was a split between Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard. You know, I was kind of hyping up Hubbard as a 0 running back target, thinking he would get the majority of the work and being a really good player in 2023 during a stretch when he was the guy, but turned into 6 for 14. Looks like no catches. Miles Sanders had 5 for 22, 2 targets and no catches. I traded Miles Sanders away and like a late round pick for Matthew Stafford in a league, so I'm sure Miles Sanders will have a career resurgence now that I've held on to him for 2 years of irrelevance or whatever. But in the receiving game, it was pretty ugly. Thielen, 4 targets, 3 for 49. Mingo, 2 for 40. Leggett, 4 for 35. He had 7 targets. Definitely interesting to see he had that many targets. He was the target leader. Deontay Johnson was second with 6, 2 for 19. But, you know, there were a lot of guys getting targets. It's hard to say, you know, what to make of it with this being a blowout. But Leggett, I think, has the most upside out of all those guys. So we're gonna move on from that game because that's disgusting. My Minnesota Vikings went to the New York Giants Stadium and absolutely shellacked them. We absolutely love a Minnesota Vikings dub here. 28-6. Wasn't even close. Sam Darnold, 19 of 24 for 208 and 2. I believe he completed his first like 10 plus. It was something crazy. It was over 10 passes, like 12. Don't quote me, but he set his career high for most completions to start a game. He did end up having 1 interception, which was unfortunate. Just I wanted him to have like a perfect game, but he looked good. I've been pretty pessimistic about the Vikings season in general and this offense, but I did think that they might get off to a good start here against the Giants. Moving forward, they have some tough matchups, so it might not. You're not going to get to play the Giants every week, so. But we have a good coach, and we have a good system, so hopefully Darnold can just kind of do what he needs to do. Aaron Jones, one of my starts of the week at running back, 14 of 94 on the ground with 1 touchdown. Also had a 2 for 15 through the air. He looked good, and I said I think he still has some juice left in the tank, and he can exploit this Giants defense in a game that should be competitive. It wasn't competitive, but it was actually better. We were blowing them out, so he was able to get work on the ground. Someone that you could maybe sell high on, though, just because of his age and his injury history, he is a guy that would not surprise me if he misses time at some point this year. And I just don't think the Vikings are going to be blowing teams out this much. Yes, he's the type of running back where even if they're behind, that just could turn into more passing game work. And this is not me saying get rid of him for nothing. You have to get rid of him. But if someone views him as a running back 1, I would definitely capitalize on that just because I don't think that's going to be the norm. I mean, he was the running back 8 this week, tied with Kenneth Walker for running back 7, actually. So, and important to note here, Sam Darnold, he was the quarterback 13, almost a quarterback 1. Justin Jefferson, 6 targets, 4 for 59 and 1. Luckily, he got in the end zone. Jordan Addison, 3 for 35 on 4 targets. I believe he's dealing with an ankle sprain or some sort of ankle injury at this point, so that's not good. Ty Chandler, important to note, he had 8 for 17 on the ground, 3 for 25 through the air. So he's kind of a handcuff in case anything happens to Aaron Jones, but he's got some juice. I've watched him a lot as a Vikings fan. He's not a bad player. Oh my god, my cold is attacking me as I keep yapping here. We only have a few more games left. I'll keep sipping my water here. We're going to move on to the Chargers hosting the Raiders, taking them down 22-10. The Chargers winning. I should have said the Chargers took them down. Herbert, not really a good game for any purposes, fantasy included. 17 of 26 for 144 and 1. Added 6 rushing yards. But in the rushing game, this is where it got crazy. J.K. Dobbins, 10 carries. Gus Edwards, 11 carries. Dobbins turned it into 135 yards and a touchdown. He had some long runs, and he even said like he needs to get in better shape because he was past the defense and he got caught a couple times. If that was like Chris Johnson, I mean, he would have had 200 rushing yards, but he looks like possibly the guy to have here in this backfield. I think Gus Edwards could have some games too if he gets some goal line carries, but 11 for 26 for Gus Edwards. He had 1 for 2 through the air. Dobbins had 3 targets, caught them all for 4 yards. And then in the passing game, Ladd McConkey only 5 for 39, but he got in the end zone and he liked the 7 targets. Probably going to be a good PPR option. Quentin Johnson had 5 targets, turned into 3 for 38. At the tight end position, Hayden Hurst and Will Dissly. Hayden Hurst had 3 targets, turned into 2 for 33. Dissly had 1 for 13 and 1 target. And then Joshua Palmer, it's kind of a mishmash of weapons here. I still don't really know what to make of it. I think Ladd McConkey is definitely the best, most consistent guy, probably week to week. But Joshua Palmer only had 4 targets, turned into 2 for 15, but he was missed on a wide open touchdown. So if he catches that, he's a guy that, you know, we're talking about, pick him up on waivers. So on the other side, Gardner Minshew won the quarterback job over Aiden O'Connell. 25 for 33, 257 and 1. Also had 1 pick. Kind of just a ho-hum game for the Raiders offense. And they lost the game. It was on a coaching decision. It was 4th and 1 in positive territory with like a few minutes left. They punted it away and then they didn't get the ball back. So yeah, that was disgusting. Zamir White, he led the team in carries, 13 for 44 on the ground, but Alexander Madison had 5 for 19 on the ground, and he had the big catch, 4 for 43 and 1, had a really nice 31-yard catch and run touchdown. It was great to watch. Where was that in Minnesota, Madison? But definitely a bit of a split and an offense that is probably not going to yield a lot of scoring opportunities. So not guys I want to rely on, but Madison looks to be someone that's worth, you know, keeping monitoring. And if one of these guys goes down, the other one probably becomes a more consistent and reliable play just because they'll get more volume. Devontae Adams, 6 targets, turned into 5 for 59. Jacoby Myers, 3 targets, caught him all for 61. And Brock Bowers is a guy that I'm going to also bring up as a buy low. 6 for 58 through the air on 8 targets. Rookie tight ends usually don't produce, but 8 targets in game 1. Sign me up. He's an athletic freak. He's one of the best tight end prospects we've had in a while, maybe ever. And to see 8 targets, I know the offense isn't great and there's other weapons there, but at the tight end position, you know, that's good. And he's a guy that can do stuff with 8 targets. You know, if like Gerald Everett or whoever is getting 8 targets, it's not going to amount to much probably. Sorry, Gerald. I didn't want to call you out, but you know what I mean? But I digress. Moving on. Seattle defeated the Broncos at home 26-20. Geno Smith, 18 of 25, 171 and 1. Also had an interception. Kenneth Walker had a monster game. Oh, also Geno had 4 for 30 on the ground and a rushing touchdown. But Kenneth Walker looked great. I watched a lot of this game. He was ripping chunk after chunk after chunk. He did get injured. I believe it was an abdominal injury, and his game status is questionable for next week. So that's always been his thing, is injuries. If he's out, Zach Charbonnet becomes next up. He had 8 for 12, 2 for 29 through the air. Wasn't efficient, but opportunity is everything. But Kenneth Walker, 20 for 103 on the ground, had 2 for 6 through the air. Also in the passing game, Tyler Lockett, leading receiver, 6 for 77 on 7 targets. DK Metcalf, huge disappointment. One of my guys, 4 targets, turned into 3 for 29. That's Patrick Surtain for you on defense. Buy low if people are overreacting. Don't react bad, or don't overreact to one bad week. Okay. If anything, he got one of his bad games out of the way. But definitely wish I would have started Jaden Reed over him in hindsight, but I would have just never thought to do that. And if I did, for all you people that started Jaden Reed, if I started him, he would have done bad, and Metcalf would have gone off. He would have probably had like an 80-yard touchdown. So everything happens for a reason. JSN, 2 for 19 through the air. Not super inspiring. And then just, I guess we can look up their snap percentages here quick. I literally had it pulled up and my internet kicked me out of the thing I was looking at. Okay, Tyler Lockett only played 36 snaps, 54% of them, but I mean, he saw 7 targets on 36 snaps. That's definitely good. JSN played 79% of snaps, 53, and then Metcalf led the way with 59 snaps, 88%. So, hey man, Tyler Lockett still got it, I guess. On the other side, Bo Nix had a dreadful game. Bad week for rookie quarterbacks for the most part. 26 of 42 for 138 and 2 interceptions, not touchdowns. 5 for 35 and a rushing touchdown on the ground. You'd like to see that mobility. Javonte Williams was set up to have a good game. Did not. 8 for 23 on the ground. Didn't really look that good. 1 catch for 0 yards on 2 targets. Jaleel McLaughlin outcarried him. 10 for 27. Estime got in there at 2 for 14. McLaughlin had 5 targets. Caught all 5 of them for 1 yard. I didn't see that before. That's crazy. Dulcich was kind of a sleeper option at tight end. Only 2 for 12. Cortland Sutton had 12 targets, which you love. Turned into 4 for 38. Josh Reynolds had 8 targets. Turned into 5 for 45. And then Devon Vele, rookie. Older rookie. I believe he was a very late round pick. 8 targets. Caught all 8 of them for 39 yards. So, guy to maybe pick up in Dynasty or deep leagues. And yeah, Marvin Mims, 1 target, 0 yards. Let's get away from that Broncos offense. I don't want to judge Bo Nix on 1 game, but it was not good. Speaking of not good, Deshaun Watson took on the Dallas Cowboys, and the Cowboys beat the Browns 33-17. They just didn't need to really throw the ball. I mean, they were kind of destroying the Browns early, and they just could do nothing. Dak Prescott, 179-1, definitely disappointing, but a guy that, I said I was starting Tua over him. And I'm glad I did. I had to start Dak in 1 league, but there's better days ahead for Dak. This was kind of a blowout, and the Browns, they didn't need to throw it, and the Browns going to be stingy. They were on the road. So I think better days are ahead. Ezekiel Elliott led the team in carries, 10 for 40, got in the end zone. He also had 2 targets, caught them both for 9 yards. Rico Dowdle, 8 for 26. If Rico Dowdle, he also had 1 target, caught it for 6 yards. Rico Dowdle hit the waiver wire in some leagues I'm in. If he's out there, could be worth picking up as a handcuff in case Zeke goes down. Also, it's 1 game, Zeke had a couple more carries. We'll see how it plays out over the long haul. Like, Zeke's an older guy for the running back position. Rico could make noise later. CeeDee Lamb, 5 for 61 on 10 targets. Also added 3 carries for 25 yards on the ground. Love that. A lot of guys had carries here. Brandon Cooks had a carry for 5 yards. Deuce Vaughn got in there for 4 yards. Cooper Rush technically had a carry for -1. Must have been a quarterback kneel. Brandon Cooks had 7 targets, 4 for 40, but he got in the end zone. That was his thing last year. Not a lot of yardage, but got in the end zone a lot. And yeah, Jake Ferguson, 3 for 15 on 5 targets. Went down with an injury. Doesn't seem like it's super serious. Could miss a game. Monitor the news after you're listening. If he's out there, you're probably playing him, but there's a good chance he's limited. So if he's for sure limited, might be worth picking up, Kobe Parkinson, Taysom Hill, but just monitor the news and we'll make some educated guesses as we get more reports. We got a few more games here, 3 more. The last non-primetime game, Commanders, Buccaneers. Buccaneers at home took down the Commanders 37-20. The Bucs offense looked great, and the Commanders defense looked terrible. Baker Mayfield threw 4 touchdowns, 24 of 30, 289 yards. Fantastic game out of Baker Mayfield. Quarterback 2 on the week. Jane Daniels on the other side was the quarterback 3. We'll get into him later, but pause. Baker Mayfield also had a 3 for 21 on the ground. Classic Rachaad White, very inefficient on the ground. 15 of 31, or 15 for 31. But he had 6 targets, caught them all for 75 yards. New rookie running back Bucky Irving, however, only had 9 carries, but turned it into 62 yards on the ground. Had 2 for 14 through the air. I think this is Rachaad White's job, but would not be surprised to see more Bucky Irving in the future, just because Rachaad White is just continuously not efficient on the ground. And Bucky Irving profiles as more of a pass catcher from what I've kind of gathered about his, archetype of player, but I mean, my goodness. he had a game where he had a good average, 6.9 a carry. I mean, jeepers. I mean, there's more to it than that, but you know what I mean? He actually didn't rush for 2 yards a carry, which Rachaad White tends to do. I called for a Chris Godwin bounce back season, and it's off to a good start. Granted, it was a great matchup. Could be a sell high opportunity if someone's really in on him, but I think he's going to be great this year. As like a wide receiver 3 or flex, someone to play on bye weeks. 8 targets, caught them all for 83 yards and a touchdown. Rachaad White caught all 6 of his for 75, like I said. Mike Evans, still going. 6 targets, 5 for 61 and 2 touchdowns. Jalen McMillan, 3 targets, 1 for 32 and a touchdown. Trey Palmer had a couple targets, caught 1 for 19. Kate on the tight end position didn't really do much. 1 catch on 2 targets for 5 yards, but yeah, that receiving group is amazing. That duo, Godwin and Evans, and then if they're just running it back from last year, that Rachaad White role, as long as he holds on to it, is going to be value in PPR leagues. On the other side, Jaden Daniels, it was not a great game. 17 of 24 for 184, no touchdowns, no interceptions, but he added 16 for 88 on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns. I told you, he's going to be good for fantasy, even if he isn't good on the field, which he had 1 bad game. I'm not overreacting, but he doesn't have to be a good passer to be good for fantasy. Brian Robinson, looking like possibly a steal, 12 for 40 on the ground, 1 touchdown, added 3 for 49 through the air. He got tackled at the 1 at least once. I want to say maybe twice, because I think Jaden Daniels had 2 goal line touchdowns. And I know one of them, Brian Robinson, was down like super close to the goal line. And I was playing against him, and I was like, oh my God, no. But yeah, he looked good. Austin Eckler, 2 for 10, 4 targets, caught them all for 52. And then in the receiving game, other than that, it was ugly. Their 2 leading receivers were running backs. Zach Ertz was their next leading receiver with 28 yards on 3 catches and 4 targets. Luke McCaffrey, 3 for 18, and Terry McLaurin, only 4 targets, 2 for 17. Before the season in a league, I traded Jacoby Myers and Gus Edwards for Terry McLaurin. I felt like that was a good deal, and if Daniels improves as a passer, it still could be, but not an encouraging start for a guy who has kind of suffered from poor passing throughout his whole career, and he's still able to overcome it at times, but the consistency can be a little bit, not there. So I really, really hope that we can get him a quarterback that can get him the ball. Really exciting game here on Sunday Night Football. Detroit Lions, Rams, Goff, Stafford revenge game. The Lions do win a close one, 26-10. Jared Goff was one of my starts of the week, and definitely underwhelmed, to say the least. I mean, not a killer week, but kind of a killer week. Quarterback 18, 12.4 points, worse than Deshaun Watson, worse than Bo Nix, who had that rushing touchdown. Sorry. It was supposed to be a good game. 18 of 28, 217, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Jahmyr Gibbs, 11 for 40 and a touchdown on the ground. Added 4 for 34 on 6 targets through the air. David Montgomery had a big game. A lot of that came in overtime, though. 17 carries, 91 yards and a touchdown. 1 target, caught it for 2 yards. Yeah, if you saw that game in overtime, he just bulldozed them to victory. Didn't even let the Rams get the ball back. Just punched it in. Running back 14 on the week with 15.8 points in half PPR. Jahmyr Gibbs was the running back 16, 15.4. Both guys you can play. I'd rather have Gibbs, obviously, but I got Montgomery for 1% of my budget in an auction draft, and that's looking like a great value. I didn't even start him, but I definitely could have, and I probably will be able to moving forward. Jameson Williams, this is what we were hoping for. Very involved. 9 targets, turned into 5 for 121 and a touchdown. I mean, the potential has been there. He's had the gambling issues, the suspensions. He's had the injuries, but he looks to be their clear wide receiver 2, and he's going to have big games moving forward. I think there will be some variability. Sam Laporta only had 4 for 45. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 6 targets, turned into 3 for 13 through the air. That's the first bad game that guy's had in seems like forever. I don't think that's going to be the norm. Wouldn't surprise me if this is the best game that Jameson Williams has all year. If you want to trade high, if someone thinks he's a true every week, like wide receiver 2, going to do this every week, then I would capitalize. But I think Jameson Williams has that role, and he's going to have good games. And if he does continue to have, I mean, he led the team in targets. If I don't think that trend's going to continue, but if he has more games like that, it is going to affect Laporta and Amon-Ra to some degree. Amon-Ra was consistent because he was the number one target. He got everything. Laporta had he had the touchdowns last year. If Jameson Williams, if there's a third guy in there getting a ton of targets, it's going to take a little bit away from them. But I think it's, they'll have their weeks. It's kind of like the Texans and the Packers where, they're going to have their weeks, or like the 49ers. It's going to be a give and take with those guys, I think. But obviously, not overreacting. If you can buy low on Amon-Ra or Laporta, if someone's overreacting, please do it. I think those are both top tier at their position still. On the other side, Stafford, 34 for 49 in his return. His return to Detroit. 317 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Kyren Williams, is he going to be the lead back? Well, he was. 18 for 50 on the ground, 1 touchdown. Added 3 for 4 through the air. I mean, you like the 3 targets is pretty encouraging, but could have done more with them. It's a tough matchup. So if people aren't happy with what he did, buy low, because we kind of expected it to be kind of a tough game. Ronnie Rivers was actually the backup in this one, 2 for 16. Blake Corum didn't get a carry. So interesting. But I think he will, down the stretch of the season. I mean, we've seen some week 1 shenanigans out of this team before. Kyren Williams was not even the starter week 1, if you remember last year. People forget. But that was was that Cam Akers? Is that the Cam Akers show? Right? Well, that's who it was, right? Yeah, I think that was him. Cooper Kupp had a fantastic game. 21 targets. Like, that's actually unbelievable. That's unheard of. 21 targets is crazy. I mean, I thought he could be a steal, but now with Puka Nacua on injured reserve, breaking news right now. I mean, he might be a league winner. This is a guy who's been the Triple Crown winner. He's been a top end wide receiver. Like, yeah, it's wow. He could be a league winner for sure. Cooper Kupp turned 21 targets into 14 for 110 and 1. Also had 2 carries for 10 yards. Health is just the only concern for him at this point. He's been dealing with injuries as he gets older, but if he's on the field, he's going to be great. Puka Nacua on injured reserve. Had 4 for 35. Had 1 for 7 on the ground. Tyler Johnson stepped up in his absence, though, later in that game. 5 for 79 on 7 targets. Demarcus Robinson, 7 targets, 4 for 42. I'd probably rather have Demarcus Robinson, but Tyler Johnson is worth picking up in deep leagues, dynasty leagues. I tried actually trading for Demarcus Robinson from a rebuilding team in the offseason. He would not give him up. I'm like, dude, you're rebuilding. Even if Robinson is good, he's like 29 or whatever. But I digress. I also did trade Kobe Parkinson to that same team, and he's looking like a nice little streamer. That trade was orchestrated so I could get Zeke back just because I needed running back depth. I'm a competitive team, but Parkinson signed that big contract and solid game. 5 targets, 4 for 47 through the air. Meanwhile, Davis Allen, the guy who is the only other real threat at that position until Higbee gets back, he had 1 target, didn't catch it. So it's looking like he's going to be a nice little streaming option until Higbee gets back at least, and maybe even beyond that. I mean, we don't know how Higbee's going to recover. And yeah, if you lost Njoku, another guy you could pick up. Final game of the slate, Monday Night Football. 49ers hosting the Jets. Aaron Rodgers is back, and he made it through the game healthy. Spoiler alert. But the 49ers did win crazily, 32-19. Yeah, Brock Purdy didn't have a good game, but it was a tough matchup. I hope you didn't play him. I played him in my guillotine league because it just kind of had to, because there's 18 teams. But 19 of 29, 231, no touchdowns, no picks. Not concerned. Added 1 carry for 11 yards. And yeah, Jordan Mason, guy I cut. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey's apparently out. Probably going to miss the next game as well. Jordan Mason had 28 carries for 147 yards and a touchdown. Also caught his 1 target for 5 yards. I just cannot catch a break in my Dynasty League. I probably shouldn't have cut him just because, like, you know, have McCaffrey. I should probably hold on to him just in case. But it's like, dude, I'm going to hold on to 3 or 4 handcuff running backs for a guy, for all my running backs, you know, like it's blah, blah, blah. Anyways, Jordan Mason was the running back 3 on the week behind only Saquon Barkley and Joe Mixon. Yeah, 21.7 points in half PPR. Deebo Samuel picked up the rushing workload a little bit too. No other running backs were involved, but he had 8 for 23 on the ground, which I kind of expected him to get some carries. Got in the end zone as well. Won me a fantasy matchup. Holy cow. I have to show you guys that before we dip out. And then through the air, I kind of took some bets on Ayuk not hitting his overs just because, you know, first game back from dealing with that contract situation, not maybe being in game shape. And he actually almost connected on a touchdown, just kind of dropped it. Could have had an okay game, but in the receiving game, Jawan Jennings actually led the way, 5 for 64 on 5 targets. Deebo Samuel, in addition to his 8 for 23 and 1 on the ground, he had 9 targets, 5 for 54 through the air. Also a guy I got rid of for nothing at one point. Drafted him myself, traded him away for Chase Claypool. We all know how that turned out. I digress. Kyle Juszczyk was their 3rd leading receiver, 2 for 40. And Kittle had an okay game, 5 targets, 4 for 40 through the air. But Ayuk only ended up with 2 for 28. It'll get better, but, you know, makes sense. Slow start after not really being at camp and all that, waiting on that contract. And then Aaron Rodgers made it through the game. They actually had a nice little touchdown drive early in that game. But Rodgers finished with 13 for 21, 167 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. And Tyrod Taylor got in at garbage time for what it's worth. 36 yards and a touchdown. And I got to show you this box score. Oh my goodness. When we're done with this. Breece Hall, he's the guy. Not super efficient on the ground, but 16 for 54 and a touchdown. Also saw 6 targets, which you love. 5 for 39 through the air. Braylon Allen as the backup got 1 carry for 8 yards. Allen Lazard had a couple touchdowns, 1 from Aaron, 1 from Tyrod. 6 for 89, 9 targets. I looked his way in DraftKings and I didn't actually put him anywhere, but he has that connection with Rodgers from Green Bay. So obviously I would expect this to be his best game of the year, but with those 2 touchdowns, but someone that's worth monitoring, especially with Mike Williams only playing a handful of snaps, coming off that ACL injury, being a decoy. He was my pivot option in a league where I had McCaffrey, the Dynasty League where I didn't have Mason, and obviously that did not work out. No targets, no catches. Garrett Wilson had 11 targets, turned into 6 for 60, but he'll have his games moving forward. And then Tyler Conklin, or Braylon Allen caught a pass for 9 yards, and then Tyler Conklin caught a pass for 6 yards. So 5 players caught a pass for the Green Bay Packers. And then, guys, before we end off this episode, I just have to show you this. I know you probably don't care, but I just have to show you. This is my box score for my week 1 matchup. This is me. I won by 0.22 points. He had Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin on that last drive. I was clenched. And I had Deebo Samuel in that game as well. And Garrett Wilson had a catch for the win, and they called it back on a flag. Oh, man. He also had Ramondre in there as well with 20 points. Worthy on the bench. I don't think he realistically would have... maybe over Jerome Ford could have played Ramondre, would have got the win, but... it got to the point where, I started Goff over Dak, who had 0.08 fewer points. And it's like, oh my God, that could have been the difference. It was a crazy week. Drake London and DK Metcalf, just absolute busts on my bench, or on my starting lineup. But I just had to share that. All right. I'm going to wrap this episode up. I've been rambling. Long episode. I'll get better at being short and concise about these as I keep doing these. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe for more fantasy football content and to become a fantasy football prodigy. We got starts of the week coming up later before those Sunday games. And I will see you guys in the next one. Good luck in week 2. Peace out.